And if I need to ask for a quorum here, or I'll yield the floor.
If the senator will withhold the request, Madam President, I'd ask for recognition.
The Republican whip.
Madam President, despite the differences between the different sides of the aisle here on the underlying legislation, particularly on the refusal so far of the majority leader to actually pay for the $6 billion cost of a 3-month extension of long-term unemployment benefits and adding that $6 billion to the $17.3 trillion national debt. Despite those disagreements, I'm confident that both parties would really like to find a way to deal with the problem of America's long-term unemployed and people who don't necessarily want to collect unemployment benefits. They want a job. They want to work. They want to provide for their families. So even as we stand here and debate yet another extension of federal unemployment benefits, it's important that we keep the big picture in mind. And obviously what we're talking about, just to remind everybody, is the basic unemployment program provides a half-year, 26 weeks of unemployment benefits. But Democrats want to extend that emergency measure, which was enacted after 2008, the fiscal crisis, perhaps it appears on a permanent basis after we've spent $250 billion since 2008, and to continue to recklessly borrow money from our creditors like the Chinese and others and leave it for our children to pay it back. How responsible is that? But the best way to help the unemployed and the best way to help Americans and America is to increase economic growth and increase job creation. Now, we've had a grand experiment known as the stimulus back in 2009, $1 trillion of borrowed money. Grand projections were made if the federal government would just spend borrowed money rather than have the private sector do that, we would see unemployment rates plummet. And, of course, that has proven not to be the case. In fact, this slow economic recovery after the Great Recession of 2008 has been the slowest economic recovery that we've seen since the Great Depression back in the 30s. But we can't adopt, or Congress can't adopt, the federal government can't adopt policies that hamper growth and discourage job creation and expect the economy to grow and jobs to be created. Let me say that again. You can't adopt policies which actually discourage small businesses from starting a business or growing their business and creating jobs. You can't adopt policies that hurt them and expect jobs and economic growth to follow. What that means is that notwithstanding the good intentions of those who embrace some of these policies, they're actually hurting the unemployed, no matter how many times they want to extend unemployment benefits on a long-term basis. Unfortunately, that's exactly what the Obama administration has done time and time again. Now, let me just say, Madam President, I'm confident President Obama would like to help people who can't find work. I'm sure the President believes as well that Obamacare will improve the health care system for 300 million plus Americans. The problem is we've seen this experiment in big government and government takeovers, whether it's of the health care system or through this trillion-dollar stimulus package. They simply have not worked. So at some point, good intentions have to give way to reality and the facts, especially when those good intentions are not translated into good results. Let me give you one example. Recently, I was in Tyler, Texas. That's over in northeast Texas, near Louisiana, at a restaurant doing a roundtable on the impact of the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare, on employers like the owner of that small diner who owned this restaurant. He told the tale of many tales, but one in particular that stuck in my mind, of a single mother who, instead of 40-hour work, was now relegated to a part-time job of 30 hours a week, and that's in order to avoid the penalties and the mandates of Obamacare by her employer. So what this single mom has to do in order to compensate for her lost income is to find another part-time job. So she ends up, instead of working 40 hours at one job, working 60 hours at two jobs, just in order to make up for that lost income. Here again, you know, if the President and his allies think that we're going to make up for the lost wages that this single mom is making by having her work week cut from 40 hours to 30 hours, I think they need to think again. That's what I mean when I say the policies of this administration have actually hurt the very people they now say they want to help by increasing long-term unemployment benefits. It is true that facts are stubborn things. And there's a mountain of evidence that if you pay people too generously, that it actually discourages some people from actively seeking employment. In fact, several years ago, President Obama's own former chief White House economist said that, quote, job search is inversely related to the generosity of employment benefits. Translated means if you pay people too much not to work, some people are going to be persuaded not to look for work. And indeed, I know there are perhaps many explanations for the slow economic recovery and the high rate of unemployment, which is up around 7%, and the largest number of people who simply dropped out of the workforce in the last 30 years, known as the labor participation rate. There's a lot of reasons for why we find ourselves where we are now, but adding benefits to people not to work is not dealing with the underlying problem of a slow economic growth and people being discouraged from creating new jobs or making full-time work, part-time work. We need to be looking at the root causes of the problem. And the problems are the policies of this administration time and time again. Well, the majority leader and his allies want to extend benefits for 3 more months. 3 more months. This is on top of the 26 weeks, which are part of the basic unemployment compensation package. But my question is, if you want to extend it for 3 months, where will we find ourselves 3 months from now? Will we be met yet with another request for an extension of long-term unemployment benefits that adds another $6 billion to the deficit? And what about 3 months later? I hope I can be forgiven, Madam President, saying this feels like a political exercise more than a sincere effort to deal with the underlying problem of joblessness in our country, particularly after we $17.3 trillion in debt, something the President seems to just not care one bit about, which as the Federal Reserve begins to wind down their bond buying program, we're going to see interest rates go up. And we're going to end up spending more and more tax dollars just to pay our creditors for the debt, while we ought to be focused on dealing with some of these root causes. Well, let me get back to my point. Some Republicans have offered to find ways to pay for this 3-month extension. And my impression is that if that were done, it would probably happen for 3 months. But we've also suggested long-term reforms that would make our system of unemployment insurance more effective. Senator Alexander, former Secretary of Education, former Governor of Tennessee, discussed yesterday at our conference lunch. He said, you know, what we ought to do is to make Pell Grants. I think they're in excess of $5,000 per person available so people can study job retraining in community colleges during that 26 weeks of unemployment. So if they can't find a job in their existing field, they can learn new skills that will allow them to get well-paying jobs in another field using those Pell Grants for job retraining. So there are a lot of good ideas out there about how we can improve the unemployment system if, in fact, the majority leader will just allow it. And he remains agnostic, I would say, at this point, whether he's even going to allow us to offer amendments to pay for the 3-month extension or some of these good, solid ideas of dealing with the root problems rather than just continuing to treat the symptom with the same lack of success in terms of decreasing joblessness and getting the economy back on track. Now, I know many of our colleagues on the other aisle, many of us share the same goals. Yet the majority leader has made it clear that this week that he's more interested in rhetoric and political gamesmanship than real reform. That's why I objected on Monday night when 17 senators were missing. The majority leader wanted to have a vote on cloture that was doomed to fail. Why? Well, not because he was interested in a real solution, but because he wanted a gotcha moment. He said, look, with 17 senators missing, the 60-vote threshold for cloture was not going to be achieved. What possible purpose could be served by having that vote then instead of doing it on Tuesday, which it was moved to, at which time that 60-vote threshold was met? The only conclusion I could draw is that the majority leader was interested in a gotcha moment instead of a real solution. But fortunately, he reconsidered and moved it till Tuesday. So far, the majority leader is refusing to pay for this extension of benefits. They're refusing to change the program by modernizing it, making it more efficient, helping people learn new skills so they can get back to work, and they're refusing to consider any other ideas than those cooked up in the majority leader's conference room behind closed doors. Well, I have in my hand 11 Republican amendments. Many of them are bipartisan. There's bipartisan support for. For example, Senator Paul, the senator from Kentucky's Economic Freedom Zones Act, I saw the president this morning announce, I think there were 5, he calls them, I think by another name, but basically the same sort of concept, looking at blighted areas and trying to provide incentives for investment and job creation in those areas of high unemployment. So Senator Paul's got a bill that would deal with that. Senator Portman, the senator from Ohio, has a reform that would simultaneously prohibit simultaneous collection of disability benefits and unemployment. That's double dipping, it seems to me, and something we ought to be dealing with. The Senator Moran of Kansas has a bill he calls the Startup Act 2.0, which is a jobs bill. The other senator from Indiana, Senator Coates, wants to offset the extension of unemployment insurance by delaying individual and employer mandates for a year. The president's already done that unilaterally for employer mandates. Why not delay the individual mandate for a year and use that to offset this extension for 3 months of unemployment insurance? So there are plenty of ideas out there. Those I know, I mentioned some of them. The senator from Oklahoma, both of them have amendments that would be good amendments to offer on this legislation. The senator from Louisiana has one. The senator from New Hampshire has one. So these are at least 11 ideas that if the majority leader would allow us to actually have a real debate as opposed to a political exercise, we could come up, I believe, with a bipartisan consensus that would actually help deal with the underlying problem and not just treat the symptoms in a way that ignores those root causes. Well, let me get back to cause number one, I think, for the difficulties many small businesses are having today and many people who work for those small businesses, and that is Obamacare. Now, I realize some people would like us to believe that this is all about the website, and once the website gets fixed, it's all going to be hunky-dory, regardless of the fact that more people have lost their current coverage by cancellation that have been signed up on the Obamacare exchanges. Well, the administration seems particularly proud of the fact that Obamacare has added hundreds of thousands of Americans to Medicaid. And as we all know, this is the safety net program designed to help people, low-income people. The problem is Medicaid itself is a fundamentally broken program that's failing our neediest citizens. The problems with Medicaid are a stark reminder that access to coverage does not mean the same thing. Access to coverage is different from having access to care. And this is what I mean by that. In Texas, only about a third of doctors will see a new Medicaid patient. That you might ask, well, that doesn't make much sense. Well, it does if you consider the fact that Medicaid, this government program, pays doctors about 50 cents on the dollar of what a private insurance coverage would pay. And because it reimburses at such a low rate, some physicians have simply said, I can't continue to add new patients to my practice and be compensated 50 cents on the dollar. So they've limited their practice. That's what I mean. There's a difference between access to coverage and access to care. So Medicaid is sorely in need of reform. All across the country, Medicaid patients have been forced to endure the humiliating experience of walking into a doctor's office and then getting turned away because the office doesn't accept Medicaid for the reason I mentioned. We've also seen lawsuits brought by providers and patients against their own state Medicaid programs saying the reimbursement rates are so low we can't actually see patients at that price. In Texas, again, the 2012 survey conducted by the Texas Medical Association, a large majority of Texas physicians agreed that Medicaid was broken and should not be used as a mechanism to reduce the uninsured. Well, despite all that, there are those who say that Obamacare's Medicaid expansion will help hospitals cope with excessive emergency room visits. Again, the problem is that flies in the face of the facts. In a recent study in Oregon, Medicaid recipients in Oregon went to the emergency room 40% more frequently than people without health insurance. You might ask, why in the world would they go to the emergency room for routine care if they have Medicaid coverage? Well, because they can't find a doctor to see them at Medicaid prices. Again, creating the illusion of access, but no real access to care, but through the emergency room. Well, Madam President, there are much better ways to expand health coverage than simply pushing Americans into a dysfunctional safety net program that is supposed to help the most vulnerable in our society, but which does not. Now, our side of the aisle made that argument consistently 4 years ago, but the President and his allies chose not to listen and decided to go it themselves on purely a party line vote when Obamacare was passed. Maybe after voters render their verdict on Obamacare in November, we'll have another chance to revisit this issue. Rather than asking the states to expand their existing Medicaid programs, the federal government should give each state greater flexibility to design a program that meets those states' needs. What works best in Texas may not work as well in New York and vice versa. What we ought to do is give the states a defined amount of Medicaid funds with very few strings attached so they can create innovative programs that provide quality care. And one of the good things about doing that is the states actually would be the laboratories of democracy that we've talked about from time to time, where we can actually learn from best practices and innovations, and other states can then use that to improve access to quality health care at a more affordable price. But I would tell you, Madam President, despite all our differences over Obamacare, Republicans and Democrats alike both want to find a way to make health care more affordable and more accessible. Unfortunately, Obamacare has proven not to have worked out as the most ardent advocates have hoped or promised. Republicans believe the best way to achieve these goals is to leave the choices in the hands of patients. And that really is the fundamental difference between Obamacare and the alternatives. The President wants the government to choose your plan, to choose your doctor, and to make those decisions for you. We think that it's better to leave those choices in the hands of patients in consultation with their own personal physician, a person that they've come to trust over the years, to help counsel them on what are wise health care choices for themselves and their families. We can also do that by increasing transparency and increasing a real marketplace so people can shop like consumers do day in and day out. And we know that that kind of transparency in terms of price and the competition when it comes to people providing a service improves the quality and lowers the cost. That's what our market economy teaches us. And we know, I would hope by now, the answer is not to place more people into a broken government program that takes their choices away. Well, Madam President, as I said earlier, good intentions don't always produce good results. But I would hope that we would learn from our mistakes as individuals, as a Congress. And the results of the last 5 years include some pretty miserable outcomes that I would hope would cause us to reconsider as we go forward together to try to address the problem of chronic joblessness in our society. As I said, the last 5 years have given us the longest period of high unemployment since the Great Depression. Massive decline in labor workforce participation. The percentage of people actually looking for work has declined to a 30-year low. It's also given us growing income inequality, the thing that the President says he cares the most about. But he doesn't offer any proposals that deal with the underlying cause, merely treating the symptoms by paying people extended unemployment benefits. We've seen an explosion of job-killing regulations. You know, I'm reminded when I see the presiding officer that I think the city with the lowest unemployment rate in America is Bismarck, North Dakota, if I'm not mistaken. Close behind that is Midland, Texas, and the two things they have in common is the shale gas renaissance and the jobs that have been created by unleashing this great American job-creating machine, and particularly in the energy sector. So what we need to do is look for ways to avoid some of the job-killing regulations which make it harder, not easier, to produce those jobs in places like North Dakota and Texas. We've also seen millions of canceled health care policies, millions of people with higher premiums, not lower premiums like the President offered and promised. We've seen an unprecedented increase in our national debt and an incredible complacency when it comes to adding $6 billion more to our national debt for a 3-month extension of long-term unemployment. And we've seen, not surprisingly, associated with all of this, a huge erosion in the public trust of the federal government. That's why this side of the aisle has been pushing and will continue to push a new set of policies that addresses the biggest concerns of the American people and the biggest challenges facing the American dream. The only question, Madam President, is this list of 11 bills that senators on this side of the aisle would like to offer on this underlying legislation, not just to treat the symptoms of unemployment, but actually deal with the root causes, whether the majority leader is going to allow those amendments to be taken up, debated, and voted on. and to allow the Senate to work its will on a bipartisan basis. That remains to be seen. If he does not, and recent history doesn't give me a lot of optimism that he will, then I think it will become even more transparent that this is not an exercise in trying to help people who are out of work. This is an exercise in trying to politicize this in a way that distracts attention from the epic failure of Obamacare and its wet blanket effect on the American economy and job creation. So I guess hope springs eternal. You can't serve in this body and hope to make a difference in the lives of the American people without without being an optimist by nature. But unfortunately, in the case of the majority leader and this, there's some doubt in my mind. I hope he proves me wrong. I hope he will open this up to an amendment process that will allow us to deal with the root causes and will not just be another exercise in gotcha Washington politics. Madam President, I yield the floor.
Madam President.
Senator from Indiana.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, family is important to Hoosiers. We work hard every day to care and provide for our loved ones and to give our children and grandchildren the opportunity to live healthy and fulfilling lives. We also recognize that strong families are often built on good jobs. Good jobs allow us to put food on the table, educate our children, and ultimately retire in dignity. And good jobs are, of course, critical for stronger communities and a vibrant economy. It all starts with the job. And without good jobs, nothing else works. As I have said before, most Americans think Congress can do something, even if it's just not doing any harm, to help create jobs and strengthen our economy. Unfortunately, over the last year, the partisan gridlock that has too often defined Congress has been in full force. During the starkest example of this gridlock, the government shutdown, a poll found that Americans cited Congress as the single biggest threat to our economy. That should have been a wake-up call for all of us, a clear signal to collectively focus on working together to give our families the opportunity to compete and succeed in the American economy. Opportunity means creating the conditions for businesses to expand and to hire more workers. It means an economic environment that encourages the private sector to invest and innovate in an ever-changing global economy. And it means providing American workers with the training they need to get the skills and education necessary to fill the jobs available today and to adapt to fill the jobs and the careers of the future. As we start a new year, I encourage us all to refocus our efforts and our attention on the responsibilities to the families that we represent. And to that end, I am focused on my opportunity agenda, a blueprint of common sense policies designed to expand economic opportunities for Hoosier workers and workers all across our country. For businesses, for their families, in 4 critical areas that we can help create more good jobs. Number 1, going all in on American energy. Number 2, providing American workers with the training necessary to fill the jobs available today. Number 3, investing in our infrastructure. And number 4, keeping our country competitive through export and innovation. Why are these 4 areas important to families across our country? As the President knows, a strong domestic energy economy is at the foundation of our potential for economic success. Affordable, reliable energy allows families to heat their homes and to travel to work and to school. Affordable, reliable energy ensures businesses can manufacture products efficiently, on time, and can compete in our global economy. And affordable, reliable American energy ensures we are investing our money here at home, rather than each year sending hundreds of billions of dollars overseas to buy energy that's already here in the United States. The production of affordable, reliable American energy here at home creates jobs here at home, not overseas. Our country is blessed with abundant energy resources. In fact, in my state of Indiana, we produce coal, biofuels, wind and solar energy, and natural gas. And we can do more. Going all in on American energy also means establishing smart regulations that protect our environment while also allowing our economy to grow. My home state of Indiana is a large producer of coal, as I know your home state of North Dakota is. We are annually in the top 10 of coal-producing states in the nation. The coal industry supports over 3,000 jobs in 10 southwestern Indiana counties and contributes over $750 million to our state's economy. Hoosiers count on affordable, reliable energy from our home state coal. This is why efforts to regulate carbon dioxide emissions at coal plants should be realistic about the technology that exists now and not negatively impact our economy. If we don't address these standards in a common-sense way, the affordable, reliable energy that Hoosier families and businesses depend on is in doubt. We should also continue full speed ahead on technology efforts that will make coal a cleaner and cleaner energy source for all of our energy needs in the years ahead. Indiana is also a leader in biofuel production, where more than 600 Hoosiers work at 13 ethanol plants and 5 biodiesel plants across our state. I have seen firsthand the good work being done at many of these plants. They use products grown here at home to produce fuel here at home, to power vehicles here at home. With ethanol and other biofuels, we aren't, again, sending our hard-earned money overseas. We're putting our neighbors to work. We're putting their hard work into creating more energy and more opportunity in our communities and across our country. This industry is another example of American-made energy and American-made entrepreneurial leadership. Second, it is very important we help our workforce hit the ground running by improving workforce development and training. The Department of Labor estimates there are 3.9 million job openings in the United States right now, despite a national unemployment rate of 7% and millions of Americans looking for work. Estimates by the Manufacturing Institute indicate there are as many as 600,000 job openings in our country that remain unfilled because employers cannot find workers who have the necessary skills to do that job. We must make a better effort to close this skills gap. I often hear from Hoosier business owners, from educators, from workers, about the pressing need to close the skills gap and have people trained in all of these opportunities and skills. Workers need to know that the time they spend training is more likely to lead to employment in a good-paying job, as employers are more likely to hire people they know have the training that's needed to be productive on day one. Third, it's important we invest in infrastructure. Indiana is called the crossroads of America. In order to live up to our name, we need the best roads, the best rail, best airports, the best waterways, so we can continue to expand our logistics and other transportation industries. Today, 22% of our bridges are structurally deficient or functionally obsolete. 17% of Indiana's roads are in poor or mediocre condition. A good way to create jobs in Indiana and across the country is to establish the right conditions for investment in our country's infrastructure. I have and will continue to support encouraging investment by requiring government agencies to work together to cut red tape, to set deadlines, and to increase transparency. Madam President, we should be building things in this country, and that means expediting the transportation, energy, and other infrastructure projects that strengthen our economy. Finally, it is important we keep Hoosier and all American businesses and industries competitive through the promotion of exports and innovation. We produce some of the best quality products in the world, from automobiles to agricultural products to medical devices. And we should continue to look for opportunities to sell these products to the rest of the world. Manufacturing accounts for a big portion of Indiana's exports. And manufactured goods exports support nearly 23% of Indiana's manufacturing jobs. That's much higher than the national average. Small businesses account for nearly 17% of our exports. And we need to do more to promote the good work of these Hoosier businesses. American businesses are competing in an increasingly challenging global economy. And we must promote a global economy that is built on responsible and fair trade policies. I am a longtime supporter of cracking down on currency manipulation, which results in an unfair playing field for American manufacturers. The Economic Policy Institute estimated that if we addressed global currency manipulation, we could reduce the U.S. goods trade deficit by up to $400 billion and create several million jobs right here at home, reducing our national unemployment rate. I have supported enhanced oversight of currency exchange rates, including new requirements that the Commerce Department investigate claims of undervalued foreign currency at the request of United States industry. I also support using U.S. trade law to counter the economic harm to U.S. manufacturers caused by this currency manipulation and tools to address the impact of this misalignment of currency on U.S. industries. We all know good trade policies create good jobs, fuel economic growth, and benefit consumers both at home and abroad. Yet we also must remember that trade only works when everyone is playing by the same rules. That's why I testified before the U.S. International Trade Commission regarding the importance of maintaining existing anti-dumping and countervailing duty orders against unfairly traded imports of hot-rolled steel. The steel industry supports over 150,000 jobs in Indiana. These trade orders help maintain a level playing field for an already vulnerable domestic steel industry. Given a level playing field, Hoosier workers can compete with anyone in the world, which is why I was pleased the ITC ruled that these trade orders would be maintained. It is also critically important that our intellectual property is also respected and is also enforced. We have a lot of work to do, but I am hopeful that Congress can learn from last year's dysfunction and start this year in a bipartisan way. Senators from both parties can agree there's nothing more important to American families and American communities than good jobs. They want us to work for them and not worry about politics. I look forward to continuing these opportunities and these efforts under my opportunity agenda by working on common sense, bipartisan ideas to go all in on American energy, to give workers the tools they need to hit the ground running, to invest in our infrastructure, and to keep homegrown businesses competitive through exports and innovation. We can help lower unemployment and build a stronger economy. Madam President, I yield back.
Madam President.
The Assistant Majority Leader.
Madam President, 50 years ago today, in his first State of the Union address, President Lyndon Johnson committed America to what he called a war on poverty. And over the next several years, America conducted the most ambitious, determined, and successful campaign in history to reduce poverty since the Great Depression. Later today, my friend Senator Harkin, the chairman of the Senate Help Committee, will speak in detail about the accomplishments of the war on poverty, and I hope my colleagues will listen closely. Senator Harkin himself has spent over 4 decades in Congress working to make sure that these anti-poverty programs continue to work. We believe on our side of the aisle that we have to be careful in spending taxpayers' dollars, but we also believe in a safety net for those Americans who, because of circumstances beyond their control, need a helping hand. I once worked for a man who served in the Senate. He was my inspiration to enter public life, and I'm honored today to have his Senate seat. His name was Paul Douglas of Illinois, and he once said, to be a liberal doesn't mean to be wasteful.
He went on to say, we must in fact be thrifty if we're to be really humane. I think we can balance both. We can help people who need a helping hand, but we can do it without wasting taxpayers' dollars. So what did this war on poverty of 50 years ago that's been much maligned, what did it achieve? Medicare, Medicaid, the Head Start program, the Elementary, Secondary, and Education Act, which was the first time our nation committed the federal government to helping local school districts, special education legislation, the Higher Education Act, which increased grants, loans, and work-study opportunities. Madam President, my story is a story that many can repeat. I went to college and law school borrowing money from the federal government. It was called the National Defense Education Act. And I borrowed money to get through college and law school, and otherwise I couldn't have done it. And the deal was that starting a year after graduation, you paid it back over 10 years at 3% interest. Well, I like to think that that loan from the government, which I paid back, was a good investment. It sure was in my life, for my family, and I hope that some people in Illinois might think it was a good investment for the nation. But it's an indication when a helping hand from the government can make a difference, a profound difference in a person's life. Before the Higher Education Act of the War on Poverty, just over 9% of Americans had college degrees. Today, almost a third of Americans have at least a bachelor's degree. There's been no act of Congress since President Lincoln pushed through the land-grant college system during the Civil War that's done more for higher education to democratize it and to give us the scientists, doctors, and other educated citizens we need. Before the war on poverty, before the Higher Education Act, before federal loans for students, take a look at the colleges and universities. It was the province of those who were well off. It was the province of great alumni who took care of their sons and daughters. It was a very sophisticated group of people who went on to higher education. It didn't include a lot of folks like me, the son of an immigrant woman who grew up in East St. Louis, Illinois. But I got my chance, and millions like me got their chance because of the war on poverty, because of the Higher Education Act, and because of the thoughtful programs of this federal government that gave me and many others a helping hand. So what else was in the war on poverty? The Civil Rights Act of 1964, one of the most transformative laws in our history. The Voting Rights Act of 1965, some view the most important civil rights legislation in our history. The Fair Housing Act of 1968. We expanded efforts to feed families who were hungry. We created the food stamp program, now known as the SNAP program, and we created the school breakfast program. How important is the school breakfast program to America and to education? Visit a school, meet the kids, talk to the teachers about what a well-fed child is as a student compared to one who has stomach pains from lack of breakfast and lack of food. A few years ago, there was an interesting exchange, not surprisingly, on the Glenn Beck show on Fox. There was an actor on there who was really upset about the growing role of the federal government. Here's what he said, this actor on Glenn Beck's Fox News show. We are a capitalistic society. Okay, he said, I go into business and I don't make it, I go bankrupt. They, the government, aren't going to bail me out. And then he added, I've been on food stamps and welfare. Did anybody help me out? No. Wait a minute. He was on food stamps and welfare? That came from the same government he was just maligning. Let me repeat that. This conservative actor said, I've been on food stamps and welfare. Did anybody help me out? No. That's an indication how people get so far afield when they criticize the government without pausing to reflect. Folks used to say to us during the course of this health care debate, you know, keep government out of my Medicare. My Medicare is important to me. Don't mess it up. Don't let government created your Medicare. Government created Medicaid for the poor and disabled. The idea of some variation on it seems to be the position of many of our friends across the aisle when it comes to government efforts to reduce poverty and create opportunities for middle-income and poor families. They seem to think that these programs are just going to reward the lazy. We're right in the middle of a debate right now on unemployment benefits, and the belief on the Republican side of the aisle is if you give people enough money to pay their rent and their utility bills, to put gas in their car, those lazy people will never go to work. I don't believe that. Will there be people who will cheat the system? Of course. There are wealthy people cheating our tax system. But the fact is, the vast majority of Americans, given a helping hand, want to get back to work. The extension of unemployment benefits is the humane and right thing to do. It used to be the bipartisan thing to do. Right now, we are divided. We could only get 6 Republicans to step up to extend unemployment benefits in America. Those benefits are now cut off at 27 weeks, and the average person is out of work in our country 38 weeks. I've met them and I've talked to them. Perhaps people on both sides of the aisle should. These folks want to get back to work. They're desperate to get back to work. But if you don't give them unemployment benefits, they can't put gas in the car, and they can't pay for their cell phone. And in this day and age, as Senator Reid of Rhode Island has said on the floor, in this day and age, that's how you go to work and find a job. You need to have your cell phone in your car to get up and go. It isn't a matter of taking the bus and filling out an application on a clipboard anymore. We need to give these folks a helping hand. Government needs to do it because at this point in their lives, they desperately need it. I say to my friends on the right, conservative circles, put down those Ayn Rand books for a minute and take a look at the real world. And listen to some real economists, too. The nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office tells us that extending unemployment benefits for long-term unemployed will create 240,000 jobs in America. How's that possible? How can spending $26 billion on unemployment benefits create jobs? I thought these folks were out of work. What do they do with the money they receive in unemployment benefits? Do they put it into the stock market, into their savings account? No, they spend it. They buy clothes for the kids. They pay the utility bills. They fill up their cars with gas. They put it right back into the economy because they're living literally day to day. 240,000 jobs would be created if we extend unemployment benefits. For those who say we shouldn't, sadly, they are reducing the number of jobs available. That's the fundamental point that many on the far right just don't seem to understand. Helping to reduce poverty and create opportunity in America is going to help us all of us. It creates a stronger economy. I know Paul Ryan. He's my neighbor being a congressman from the neighboring state of Wisconsin. I like him. We served on the Simpson-Bowles Commission together. He's thoughtful. We disagree on a lot of things, but he's a thoughtful, conscientious person. But when he calls America's social safety net a hammock that creates dependency and perpetuates poverty, he's just plain wrong. Opponents of government action who look at the fact that there are still poor people in America and conclude that, therefore, the war on poverty failed are just as wrong as he is. The official poverty level looks only at cash income. It doesn't take into account non-cash benefits like the SNAP program or housing assistance. And a recent analysis by the Center on Budget Policies and Priorities used a broader, more accurate measure of poverty called the Supplemental Poverty Measure. That measure looks not just at cash incomes, but non-cash benefits. Using this more accurate measure, the center found that government benefits lifted 40 million Americans out of poverty in 2011. I have these Republican critics of the food stamp program who say, this is just plain wrong, that so many people are drawing food stamps. You ought to go out and meet these people. Who are these people? Out of the 43, 44 million Americans drawing food stamps, over half of them are children, dependent children, who are receiving enough money through the food stamp program for their parents to put food on the table. There's also a large portion of them elderly and disabled, and a large portion, 1 million, who are veterans. Those are the recipients, and many of those who qualify for food stamps are working. They're not getting a very good paycheck. They're earning the current minimum wage, which is not enough to get by. Food stamps give them a little extra help each month to keep food for their family. That's the reality of low-income, hard-working Americans, a reality which, sadly, this chamber is removed from many times. This chamber doesn't realize what people are up against. Social Security has had the largest impact on any program. But means-tested programs such as SNAP, the Earned Income Tax Credit, the Child Tax Credit, lifted 20 million Americans, including 8.5 million children, out of poverty. When the Republicans in the House particularly want to cut back on these programs, they are going to push these hard-working, low-income families deeper into debt and further away from the basics that they need in life. The poverty rate in America is already too high. Growing income inequality should be an embarrassment to all of us. Lifting 40 million Americans out of poverty through the War on Poverty programs and government assistance is an undeniable success. Without the public social safety net, the poverty rate in America would be nearly twice what it is today. Joe Califano was Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare under President Johnson. Here's what he said 15 years ago. If there's a prize for the political scam of the 20th century, it should go to the conservatives for propagating as conventional wisdom that Great Society programs of the 60s were misguided and failed social experiments that wasted taxpayers' money. Nothing, Califano said, could be further from the truth. In fact, from 1963, when LBJ took office, until 1970, when his Great Society programs were felt, the portion of Americans living below poverty dropped from 22.2% to 12.6%, the most dramatic decline over such a brief period in this country's history. Califano went on to say, this reduction in poverty didn't just happen. It was the result of a focused, tenacious effort to revolutionize the role of federal government with a series of interventions that literally enriched the lives of millions of Americans. Some critics say that it's the job of churches and charities, not government, to help those who've hit a rough patch in life. Well, one of my sheroes in life is a woman named Sister Simone Campbell. She's the director of Network, a Catholic social justice organization, and she's probably better known as the ringleader of the Nuns on the Bus. Sister Simone Campbell testified last summer at a House hearing chaired by Congressman Paul Ryan of Wisconsin. She said that Bread for the World has calculated how much money religious institutions and charities would have to raise just to make up for food stamp cuts proposed by last year's House Republican budget. Listen to this, Madam President. Sister Campbell said, quote, every church, synagogue, mosque, and a house of worship in the United States, every one of them, would need to raise $50,000 each year for 10 years to make up for the cuts that the Republicans wanted to make in the food stamp program in the House of Representatives. That's just one cut that they've proposed. So to say that the charity of America, which is legendary and well-deserved in terms of its praise, to say that they can take care of this problem ignores the reality. Denigrating and decimating anti-poverty programs won't reduce poverty or create jobs or strengthen America's struggling and shrinking middle class. As President Johnson said 50 years ago, our time is necessarily short and our agenda is already long. So we ask friends on the other side of the aisle to work with us to help America. Please start off by extending unemployment benefits for 1.3 million Americans. For goodness sakes, at this time of year when most of this country is facing bone-chilling cold in Wisconsin and Illinois, we just went through it this week. I've never seen conditions like this that I can ever remember. And to think that you might be part of an unemployed worker's family, wondering if you'll be able to pay that utility bill, keep the kids warm, put some food on the table while you look for a job, and we pick this moment in time to cut unemployment benefits? For goodness sakes, we are a caring and compassionate nation. If we can't stand behind those who are struggling at this point in life, who are we? What are we? There's all kinds of excuses that can be made. But in the bottom line, it gets down to something very basic. John Kasich is the governor of Ohio. He and I came to know one another when we were both elected to the House of Representatives some years ago. He's a Republican. He was one of the few who won in 1982 and went on to become the governor of his state. He had a moment of reflection the other day, and I'm going to paraphrase it, but he said, I'd like to say to my Republican friends, when you die and get to the pearly gates, St. Peter is not going to ask you how much you invested in your life in making government smaller. You're going to be asked, what did you do to help the poor while you were on earth? And that, I think, is a legitimate question that Governor Kasich raised, not just for Republicans, but for all of us. What have we done to help those people who are struggling to get by? Those who really would be interested in a long-term debate about growing the economy, but are more interested in putting food on the table today. That's what it's all about. The war on poverty successfully raised Americans out of poverty. The government stepped in when there was no place else to turn. And that's really the role of government, to be there when there's no place else to turn. The American family, through its government, stood by those who were less fortunate. We've got to do the same today. And I'll close, Madam President, by saying the proposal by Senator McConnell that he made yesterday troubles me greatly. Here's what he said. He said, we will pay for the extension of unemployment benefits, $26 billion, but the way we'll pay for it, the Republicans suggested, was to eliminate that section of the Affordable Care Act which guarantees that you can't discriminate against people because of pre-existing medical conditions. What the situation was before this law passed was, of course, if you had a child with diabetes, if your wife was recovering from cancer, you might not be able to buy health insurance, or if you did, it'd be too expensive. So we changed that and said you can't discriminate against people with pre-existing conditions. Senator McConnell came to the floor yesterday and said, we want to eliminate the personal responsibility section when it comes to the Affordable Care Act. We want to eliminate the so-called individual mandate, and that's how we'll pay for 1 year's unemployment benefits. What Senator McConnell was suggesting was reintroducing into health insurance this discrimination against people with pre-existing conditions for 300 million Americans as a way to pay for 3 months or a year of unemployment benefits. That's a terrible trade-off. I know how much the other side hates and loathes the Affordable Care Act. We used to have a senator from Arkansas, Dale Bumpers, and to use a phrase he used often, they hate the Affordable Care Act like the devil hates holy water. But the fact of the matter is, to turn on 300 million Americans and to remove their protection under the Affordable Care Act against discrimination based on pre-existing medical conditions to pay for unemployment benefits? What a Faustian bargain. Is that the best the other side can come up with? It isn't. The best they can come up with is to stand by these people, the less fortunate people among us, struggling to find work, and give them the basics in life. Give them the necessities they need to get by. I'm confident they'll find a job, they'll get back to work, and they'll be taxpayers again someday. But let's stand by them, their spouses, and their children in this time of need. That's what happened 50 years ago with President LBJ's State of the Union address. That's what should happen today. I yield the floor.
Madam President.
The senator from Nebraska.
Thank you, Madam President. As we begin a new year, the Senate returns with many significant challenges before us. One such challenge is the security of our citizens' private information. Just before Christmas, news broke out that Target, a popular retail store in Nebraska and all across this nation, had experienced an enormous data breach involving nearly 40 million debit and credit account numbers. That's nearly 1 in 10 Americans who had their sensitive personal information put in jeopardy. Between November 27th and December 15th, scammers silently stole massive amounts of consumer information from Target. The timing of this breach is significant, not only because it happened during the peak of the holiday shopping season, but also because this data is reportedly being sold in black markets around the world. On December 20th, Target announced the information involved in this incident included customer name, credit or debit card number, and the card's expiration date and CVV. It was further determined on December 27th that encrypted PIN information or encrypted personal identification numbers associated with that data was also stolen. This wasn't just an attack on Target, which has 14 stores in my home state of Nebraska. It was a crime against millions of hardworking citizens. And let me be clear, it's also much more than just mere inconvenience for consumers. Yes, such thefts complicate the daily routines of Americans, but it can also potentially damage their credit ratings, and it's an incredible tax on people's time. It also leaves many feeling vulnerable, including, unfortunately, the most vulnerable among us, the elderly. As a member of the Senate Commerce Committee, which has jurisdiction over this issue, I urge the chairman and our ranking member to begin looking into this matter further. Our nation's entire data security system is in desperate need of revamping, and that's going to require congressional action. What happened with that Target breach is not an isolated incident. TJX Companies, which owns the national retail chains TJ Maxx and Marshalls, it was breached in 2007. Sony and Epsilon were also attacked in 2011. We learned on New Year's Eve that the popular social communication platform Snapchat was also hacked, a breach of about 4.6 million user names with their corresponding phone numbers. These are just the latest examples, but we all know the problems run much, much deeper. Identity theft has been the #1 consumer complaint at the Federal Trade Commission for the last 13 years in a row. The average financial loss for each instance of identity theft is $4,930, and it's been estimated that identity theft resulted in $24.7 billion loss for our country in 2012. Given these realities, we need to dedicate more time and energy to solutions that substantially improve the safety of our online activities. While the Target breach is important and deserves our attention, so too should the security risks posed by healthcare.gov, as well as the federal and state insurance exchanges set up under Obamacare. Empyrean, a major U.S. credit reporting bureau, recently released its 2014 data breach industry forecast, which states, quote, "The healthcare industry by far will be the most susceptible to publicly disclosed and widely scrutinized data breaches in 2014, close quote. As those who found out the hard way can tell you, healthcare.gov takes and holds a lot of sensitive information, including our social security numbers, names, and other information that can be transmitted. It's also been reported that hackers have attempted to break into the website at least 16 different times. Several experts say those numbers are very conservative estimates of the known attempts. Health and Human Services contractors also identified security vulnerabilities, which HHS ignored before the site went public on October 1st. The protections and breach notification standards for Obamacare, which people were forced into, don't even meet the minimum standards put in place for the private sector. Every Nebraskan and every American has the right to know if their private information has been compromised. Fortunately, data security appears to be an area where Republicans and Democrats can come together and do something positive for the American people. We must take great care, however, not to make the problem worse. Smart policy results from an open, collaborative process with input from businesses, consumers, and security experts. That's going to be the answer, not more red tape. We should seek to streamline our data security laws to provide clarity and consistency. So I look forward to working with my colleagues on the Commerce Committee to address these data breaches and to protect the integrity of Nebraskans and Americans' personal information. Thank you, Madam President. I yield the floor.
The senator from Vermont.
Madam President, while the distinguished senator from Nebraska is still on the floor, I found much to agree with her in her comments, and I hope